Our target one night was right on the coast, Haiphong, but it was a naval shipyard. And we come across the beach line and the whole sky lit up. It lit up so much that I didn't need the radar, I could see visually. When we came across that shipyard, dropped all that ordnance. And then because of the anti-aircraft fire, we did a hard right turn at low altitude and came back down the ship harbor at just wave top height, just screaming it. And the North Vietnamese are shooting their own ships as they're trying to hit us coming down the harbor. They're shooting through the ships. And we were awarded for that mission the Distinguished Flying Cross. But it was real. I mean, it was not a political deal at that point. It was heavy combat. And we were losing a lot of guys. There was just a sense of energy and excitement and adventure and the stimulation of it, the noise, the sound, the exhaust, the smell of the gas. But boy, when I experienced it, I thought that was it. The Navy had a flight indoctrination program, and I got into it, and I was hooked ever since. I mean, it was that quick, and I had really no exposure to it before that. When I went to flight school after graduation in Pensacola, we were on our way. The energy level was just off the scale. All these young guys all wanted to come down, prove themselves, and get going. Sun shining, beach, airplanes. I mean, it was unbelievably stimulating. I thought, man, this is the culture for me. Naval flight training was about an 18-month process. And then I was selected for jet training, which was in Meridian, Mississippi. Everybody was pushing as hard as they could. Well, I had my selection of airplanes, whether it was an F-4 Phantom, which is a fighter, or the A-6 Intruder, which was low-level attack, air-to-ground as opposed to air-to-air. And a lot of what they did was low-level flight through the mountains, through the Cascades. I thought, man, I'd love to do that. Didn't realize it carried 22 500-pound bombs at the time. Should have read further into the manual to figure that out, right? It's amazing the decisions you make when you're young and think you're on top of things. I finished flight training in December of '70, so at that point I was 24 years old. Got my wings in December, and we headed to Whidbey Island to fly A-6 Intruders. This was early 1972. We had heard stories about Vietnam, but it just didn't feel really personally connected to it, didn't feel threatened by it at all. That's what we were trained for, but it just seemed remote. And I think when we sailed under that Golden Gate Bridge and all of a sudden the States disappeared and we're at sea headed for Vietnam, it got really real in a hurry. My first mission to fly over North Vietnam, I'm a really young guy. In our first launch on a daylight mission into North Vietnam, we came across the beach doing everything they told us to do. We were probably 450 knots with a full load of bombs on a nice daylight deal. I'm flying wing on another pilot's airplane up here, and he's crossing, and as he crosses in front of me, his whole airplane goes up in an explosion. And we crossed, and then I rolled back up to see what happened. And I look down, all I see is a plume of smoke coming out of the river. And so we headed back to the ship, and about halfway back to the ship, I hear my flight leader come up on the radio. His call sign was Slick. I said, Slick, where are you? He says, I'm headed back to the ship. I says, what? Join up on his right wing, and he had a hole about that big around in his right wingtip. And when that shell had gone through his wing, that fuel in that wing had vaporized out the back, and that's what I saw. So that was my first mission over North Vietnam. And we ended up being there almost a year, doing that almost every day. When we got to Vietnam, even that first mission, it really got my attention. I said, man, what? You know, it's like the Rocky movie, you know, he gets to about the third round and he realizes he's in for the fight of his life. The tempo of the music picks up. It was kind of like that, except it happened the second day. And there's no background music. There was a bond in there and a camaraderie, and for whatever we felt in terms of fear, we knew the guys next to us were going and we're not going to stay behind. You starting 15 jets on the flight deck, it's something else. Just the sound and the heat and the winds coming down the flight deck. We're doing checklists and taxiing out, spreading the wings and snapping on the oxygen mask and double checking everything in the cockpit. Next thing you know, you're on the catapult, and we go from 0 at full power to about 160 knots in about the length of a little less than a football field. It was just focus. There were no feelings. And we could fly low level at night with the radar. They rarely could see us. If they mostly would shoot at sound. Tell where you were, they'd just shoot straight up in the air and hope you'd fly through it. And that was before they shot off the surface-to-air missiles. And they'd usually shoot those in pairs just to make it more interesting. We could dogfight those missiles at night because our airplane would turn better than those missiles could. So what you really needed was a lot of speed and energy on the airplane and some altitude not to hit the ground when you start maneuvering. And just kind of hold your breath, and when the first one gets close, take a hard break one way or the other to avoid it and let it blow up in your rearview mirrors. It's a heck of an air show, I'll tell you. It's hard to explain. The worst experience was in January. The negotiations were going on. We thought the war was over in all intents and purposes, yet they kept scheduling us to go in, and I had flown a mission, I think it was a midnight mission, into central North Vietnam to attack a target, and it was hugely disorienting. We're being shot at. You just lose all sense of up and down. Turned around, came back, the ship and landed, and I had another mission about 6 o'clock in the morning. So after we debriefed our mission, I went to bed. And I hadn't gotten to sleep for a little bit, and they came and woke me up and they said, hey, your roommate hasn't come home. And they were flying against pretty much the same target I had been to. And so I was one of the search and rescue planes to launch before sunlight to go in and see if we could at least hear a beeper or a voice radio on these guys, and nothing. And it was at that point, so we have oxygen masks on, we're talking back and forth in the cockpit. It's pretty quiet. All of a sudden I just burst into tears. I just went into sobbing tears in the cockpit. And that accumulated 11 months, all the losses we had had. This was my roommate, probably my closest friend on the ship. And the war is over, and he's lost. And the war ended about a month later, and the ship came home. And as the ship got back to the States, headed back to Alameda, our base was at Whidbey Island, and we had a missing man formation. I flew in that we came across the base at Whidbey Island with a missing man thing. Just to talk about that's 50 years ago, still brings up emotion of that loss and the relationships. Came back in March of 1973. I ended up in Pensacola as a flight instructor in the same hangar the Blue Angels were in. And that's how I got selected for the Blue Angels, I was there. And I had the quickest transition to Blue Angels anybody in history ever had. I get selected, it's announced, my orders are official. I go to my locker, I put my stuff in a helmet bag, I walk across the hangar, I walk upstairs. The Blue Angels are on a road trip for an air show. There's a chief sitting upstairs. I said, I'm Jim Horsley. Here's my orders. I'm checking in. He says, welcome to the Blue Angels. There's a locker in there. Go put your stuff in there and get a blue flight suit. There's an airplane sitting on the line. Go jump in and take her for a ride. That was it. That quick. These are A-4 Skyhawks, a single seat, single engine. They have a roll rate of 720 degrees a second. And if you think about that, you can take the stick and go like that, and the airplane's rolled twice, and your eyeballs are caged. It was a really hard airplane to slow down.
We go.
This is what it's like to fly with the Blues. What they do and the way they do it is something you never tire of watching. A perfect blend of man and machine that is poetry in motion.
Speed's about as high as maybe 450 knots, and altitudes as low as sometimes 150 feet. Everything is choreographed, no freelancing, unbelievably high discipline, unbelievable practice and training to do what we're trained to do. The schedule was unbelievably intense. 2 months at winter training, and from then we go all the way to just a couple weeks before Thanksgiving, and we would go literally city to city to city. It was exhausting, but it was also hugely stimulating.
They perform the difficult art of formation flying, and to constantly seek perfection is the experience of being a Blue Angel.
When I finished the Blue Angels in November 1981, I had made the decision at that point I was getting out of the Navy. And so that was about a 12-year Navy career altogether. I didn't get into art till about 12 years ago. I'd always liked to doodle. Once I put some paint on a canvas, I was hooked. And I've gone from portraits of homeless people in Seattle to Central Oregon horses, and now I'm focused more on these tribute paintings, kind of honor people for their service and other things, relationships. So this is the painting. It's a tribute painting for Iwo Jima, for a local citizen's Marine who fought there at age 16. And it's a gift to their family and will hopefully be with all of his memorabilia. And the painting is mostly finished, but what I'm trying to do now is oil it up, because over time the paint dries out and then you have to refresh it. And it's a really meaningful painting to me because it's got so many different images. And this painting is called Every Marine a Flag Raiser, because even though there were only a few that raised it, everybody else was involved in it. It's by no means perfect, but this is kind of a memory piece. All of the brain power it took to fly airplanes was a left brain exercise. Art is completely on the other side. It's a right brain deal. Art is so dynamic. There are so many factors that go into art. I mean, What's the shape of what you're trying to do? What are the values? How dark, how light are they? That's all very dynamic. Same thing with aviation. So every brushstroke is intentional, the same way everything you do with an airplane is intentional. People say, oh, you got great giftedness as an artist. I don't think it's a giftedness. I think the gift is my heart's desire to do as good as I can. And then I call myself really a journeyman painter, not an artist, because I work at it. I always have felt I've lived my life for a higher purpose. Early in my life, I thought my higher purpose was my own significance. Then in faith, I found out that really it's God gives me the significance only through the relationship. So it's more about the being of who I am as opposed to doing of who I am. I don't aspire that my life is going to be incomplete if I don't get somewhere or see something. I have always had to be involved in something that made a difference. And you can make a difference anywhere. So it wasn't what kind of job did I have to have? Who was I in that job? The fulfillment is in the fulfilling. How's that?